100,000 people these last 14 years have died from austerity-related causes. That means 300,000 people have died for reasons of financial instability, insecurity, the state under the Conservative Party withdrawing payment for things which are very basic. And we see the Labour Party continuing that policy with the removal of the heating allowance, amongst many other things. 300,000 people is the population of Nottingham, gone forever in this country for paltry, pathetic reasons. That's why we need to fight back. And Ijaz is that man who can do that. He can be in Coventry City Council fighting for what he's spoken about. These are common sense issues. Keeping the streetlights on, common sense. Cleaning up the rubbish, common sense. The Tories and Labour come round year after year, knocking our doors, offering exactly the same things. What have they done? Diddly squat. And on that note, I'll pass you to George Galloway.
Thank you very much to everyone who's here, and my apologies for my late arrival, especially in the middle of my comrade's speech. Very happy to speak for the first time in my life, I think, in Coventry. I know that my friends will have spoken about the local issues and even the national issues, to which I will return. But if I may, given the importance of this date of 7th October, I'd like to say a few words to you and to the larger number of people who are going to be watching on the live stream. I think it would be remiss of me not to do so. The 7th of October is a very auspicious date. On the 7th of October, in 1944, the Jewish inmates of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp rose up in an uprising. They tore down the walls. They tore down the barbed wire. They murdered their guards, their SS guards, in significant numbers. And they fought with their teeth, where that was all that they had, for freedom. All of them were killed by the beasts who were keeping them in that concentration camp, that death camp. And 200 other inmates were the next day picked by lottery and murdered against a wall to discourage the others. That was on the 7th of October, 1944. The perspicacious amongst you will already have seen a parallel in what happened on the 7th of October of 2023. Now, this is a difficult day for us because state propaganda in all Western states is in full industrialized narrative control. And people like me have been receiving calls all day from journalists and public calls from other politicians to say that it is incumbent upon us to fall into line with the state narrative in this and in other states. So it's a difficult day to say what I'm going to say next. We in the Workers' Party stand foursquare with the Palestinian people in their despair, in their agony, in the despair, the same despair that drove the inmates of Auschwitz-Birkenau is the despair that was the wellspring of 7th October 2023. If I put you, your parents, your grandparents in a concentration camp, deprived you of food, regularly murdered you, occupied your land, air, and sea space, regularly bombarded you, and murdered your children, you'd rise up too, because that's what human beings do when placed in a concentration camp, when placed in a state of despair. And the truth is, it's a miracle that 7th October 2023 didn't happen before. It's a miracle that it didn't happen every day. Because the human condition, when pushed beyond that which any human being can, with dignity, endure, will rise up against it. We never had the chance, despite all the efforts of the Luftwaffe in this city, to break the spirit of the British people. We continued to resist, to stand alone for a time. But if we had been occupied by the Nazis who were at the Channel ports around this time in 1940 until the midsummer of 1941, when the few of our Royal Air Force, complemented by Polish pilots, pilots from the Empire as it was called then, French pilots who had escaped with our men at Dunkirk, during that period, there was every possibility that our country would have been occupied, that many people like you would have been in concentration camps, deprived of all and everything that makes human life bearable. We would have risen up too. The best men and women in this country would have joined the resistance, like the French resistance, whom Hitler called terrorists when they rose up against their occupier, when they cut the throats of the SS and the occupying Nazi forces. They called them terrorists. We called them freedom fighters. We called them the resistance in France. We would have been the resistance in Britain. And the Palestinian people are the resistance now in occupied Palestine. It's hard for me to say these things today of all days. The pressure is enormous. But when the going gets tough, the tough get going. We will never surrender our support for the Palestinian people under occupation and under bombardment. We have had an entire year of watching, not on our television screens, because it doesn't appear there, but on our telephones. We have had an entire year of watching not 1,200 people being killed, but 160,000 people being massacred, most of them women and children. Most of them. At least 65, but maybe 75% of the dead and wounded, mutilated, amputated, scarred for life, emotionally destroyed, have been women and children. And the fact that our state narrative today cannot even spare one word for them is what makes our party and its perspective so important. Because when the House of Commons is unanimous, it's almost always unanimously wrong. And this House of Commons, this shrunken House of Commons, with the exception, I should say, of the local MP, Zara Sultana, who today, she's not a Labour MP anymore, she's suspended. Why is she suspended? For standing up for our old age pensioners who just had their cold weather payment stolen from them by a so-called Labour government. She spoke courageously in the House of Commons today and was treated with utter contempt by the so-called Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, Keir Starmer, Blair, Mark II, Tony Blair, without the laughs. This grim vista of tyrannical media control, even now moving into banning people from social media, from enunciating an alternative view, a contrary perspective, is what we are standing against. And if we do not, then we are coming to the end of the period in which it was possible to describe Britain as a democracy, to describe Britain as a free country. There are many people, 5 people, have told me today, and I've been in the air most of the day, that they would have liked to come here this evening, but they were afraid to do so. They were afraid that journalists might waylay them, misrepresent their attendance as some kind of celebration of October 7, or that demonstrators might be outside and there might be trouble. That's the kind of Britain we are now living in, where if you speak up for the Palestinians, isn't this the unkindest cut of all? Those that are the victims of terrorism are called the terrorists, and the terrorists are called the victims. It is a complete inversion of reality, a complete inversion of the truth. I see some African people in the hall tonight. When I was growing up, don't tell the wife, she thinks I'm 45. When I was growing up, the Mau Mau rebellion was taking place in Kenya. I can still recall the hushed tones on television and in adult conversation around me, how the Kenyans were described as the terrorists when they were merely trying to kick out the colonizers of their country who had held them in bondage for centuries, stolen their very sons and daughters, and trafficked them to the new world where they could pick cotton for the colonizers there. I remember, I was very young, but I grew up in a very radical house with an Irish mother who knew all about colonialism. I remember thinking how strange it is that we, the British, and settlers who look like us, how could they be the goodies in Africa? What right did they have to rule in Africa, to exploit the people in Africa? In other words, the point I'm making is that colonialism is nothing new. Our whole country is based upon what was at various times defined as our divine right. God told us to sail the seven seas and conquer a third of the entire world's population because we were doing God's work in enslaving them, or they were children and we were the grown-ups, and we had to go there and hold their hands until they were grown up enough to govern themselves, but only if whoever governed them agreed that our interests came first. I see some Bengalis in the room. When Britain captured Bengal, it was the richest place in the world, Ijaz. It was the richest place in the whole world. And when we left Bengal, it was the poorest place in the world. You really don't have to be Einstein to work out what happened in between. We stole 13 trillion pounds from India, as it then was, in its entirety. 13 trillion, an unimaginable number. We stole it by force of arms and trickery. It's not a new thing, this colonialism, imperialism. These are big words. What do they mean? In George Orwell's first novel, Burmese Days, placing himself in the figure, the character of a colonial official in Burma called Jim Florey. He's in a conversation with a young woman. He's trying to impress her. Keeps using the word imperialism. Finally, the girl says, "What is this imperialism of which you speak?" And Florey answers, "It's going to other people's countries and stealing their things." As good a definition of colonialism as it's possible to arrive at and delivered in a single line of dialogue. We have been doing it for centuries, going to other people's countries and stealing their things. Now, of course, the ordinary British worker profited little from the looting. They may have, though even that is arguable, had a marginally higher or less low standard of living in the empire period than they would have if not for the empire, but the rest was looted by our rulers, our ruling families, who are the same ruling families who rule us today. It is the system under which we live that is the root of all of our problems. Now, tonight in Lebanon, there is a truly massive blitzkrieg by cowards from the air who don't see the victims that they are creating, but they are creating thousands of them in just days. The kill rate in Lebanon is higher than the kill rate in Gaza, and it shows no sign of stopping. But here I have the melancholy duty to report to you that while you have been in here, Channel 13, television news in Israel, has announced that an attack on Iran is imminent and may even now be in the air. This is important for many reasons, but the most important is that Iran has pledged that it will respond to any new attack by Israel with overwhelming force. Or to use the words of one Iranian minister, in unimaginable ways. That means that if tonight Israel attacks Iran, by the morning Iran will have attacked back. Not with 175 rockets this time. Not even by 1,750 rockets this time. But by thousands and thousands of ballistic missiles, hypersonic, unstoppable. No iron dome can possibly resist them. Which means that by tomorrow, the entire region may be in all-out war. In those circumstances, we are potentially looking at World War III. Because if Israel cannot prevail with conventional weapons, who here would bet anything at all that they will not have recourse to the hundreds of nuclear weapons which they illegally, illicitly have created and maintained? Only a fool would bet that they would somehow not have recourse to those weapons. And over the weekend, there was an ominous rumble in the Iranian desert, which could have been an earthquake, but most people believe was Iran testing its own nuclear weapon. If Israel fires nuclear weapons at Iran, and Iran fires nuclear weapons at Israel, and Israel's allies, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, all nuclear armed countries, come to the aid of Israel, then Russia and China will come to the aid of Iran. And what are you going to call that except World War III? In which case, all of our talk tonight might just be OTOs. There might be no election, but let's hope that we at least get you elected as a council before the balloon blows up. We are desperately let down by our political class. Who would have thought that little Rishi Sunak would turn out to be a better Prime Minister than Keir Starmer? It's almost impossible to believe. A wet lettuce, Liz Truss, has turned out to be a better Prime Minister than Keir Starmer. Well, you don't believe me? Let's take just two examples. I heard Keir Starmer and his crew 100 times accusing the Tories of preparing to take the old people's warm weather payments, cold weather allowance. I heard them. I saw the lips move. They were denouncing the Tories as going to rob our pensioners. But they didn't. It was Starmer and Labour that robbed our pensioners. I heard Keir Starmer hundreds of times denounce the two-child cap on child benefit as cruel beyond belief. What does the third child do to deserve poverty? She didn't choose to be the third born or the fourth born, and you're refusing to give her child benefit, which is a pittance in any case, by the way. As anyone would, I have 6 children, I know how little. But the Labour Party was no sooner in the door than it announced that it was keeping the two-child cap on child benefit. And the very next day, don't think I'm exaggerating, look it up, the day after they made that announcement of the cold weather payment being withdrawn from 10.8 million people, they handed over another 600 million pounds to the crook in Kiev, Zelensky, the dictator of the Ukraine, bringing to 13 billion pounds the amount of your money they have given to a war in far eastern Europe, which has nothing to do with you, except that your government is up to its neck in it for its own imperial reasons as a servant of the American empire. So you see, there's no real disconnect between the international, the national, and the local. You'll have heard already about all the local problems here. Well, that's because they say there's no money. Why is there no money? Because the national government follows policies that protect the rich at the expense of the poor. And the national government is involved in war after war after war overseas. I saw a column of tens of thousands of Lebanese refugees walking to Syria yesterday. Where do you think they're going to end up, these refugees? They're going to end up on a Reform Party political broadcast in a rubber dinghy headed for here. They're not going to stop in Syria. It's already broken by war and sanctions. They're going to go to Turkey, which already has millions of refugees, and is going to keep them moving. And where